I handed Gavin the brass key while the Pacific threw silver light across the cottage windows. And for one suspended second, he looked exactly like the man I had married. He laughed under his breath, turned in a slow circle, and pressed the key into his palm as if I had finally placed his whole future there. "Julianne," he murmured, looking past me at the water, "this is everything." And I smiled like a woman giving her husband the life he had always claimed to want. The cottage sat high above the bluff in Laguna Beach. White trim, pale cedar shingles, a wraparound porch catching the salt wind he once said he wanted every morning. I had furnished it quietly. Linen on the bed, warm wood in the kitchen, clean glass facing the ocean. Every room arranged to feel effortless because that was the language Gavin trusted most. He touched the back of a dining chair, glanced toward the deck, then came close enough to kiss my temple and breathe. "You did this for us." While I held his gaze and answered, "For the future." At dinner he drank the wine I poured, complimented the halibut, and let himself relax into the version of me he had already decided was safe to leave behind. Candlelight softened his face. The surf moved steadily below us, and when dessert was gone, he reached into his leather bag and slid a slim folder onto the table. "I didn't want to do this cruelly," he said, almost gentle. "But I met someone, and I think we both deserve a clean ending." I looked at the folder, then at his hand resting beside it. The same hand that had closed around my key 2 hours earlier like it belonged to him. He was expecting shock, maybe tears, maybe the trembling gratitude of a woman being offered dignity instead of humiliation. But all I felt was the calm that comes when the evidence finally speaks aloud. "I know," I said, and before the color finished leaving his face, I placed my own folder beside his, turned it toward him, and watched the first crack open in the evening he thought he controlled. Gavin had always been easy to admire in public because public was where he performed best. All sharp jackets, easy laughter, and the kind of certainty people confuse with substance. When we married, I thought that energy meant we were building something together. But what we were really building was a life where his shine depended on my structure. By 34, I was director of development at a contemporary art museum in Los Angeles, and Gavin was selling himself as a hospitality branding consultant with expensive taste and perfect timing. Inside the marriage, my work never looked grand, which was exactly why it disappeared so easily into the background of his life and made everything around him feel effortless. I handled donor seating, thank you notes, tax folders, flight confirmations, deadlines, and the social memory that let Gavin walk into a room looking polished instead of prepared. He liked to kiss my forehead, flash that warm smile, and murmur, "You make everything easier." Then take the ease I created and wear it like proof of his own genius. For a long time, I mistook that arrangement for partnership because the machine still ran. The bills were paid, the dinners happened, and the outside of our life stayed clean. What changed first was not romance but access, because Gavin stopped asking me to stop by the studio, stopped leaving his screen face up, and stopped naming clients with any real detail. He still wanted the visible benefits of a wife who kept everything smooth, but he had already started locking the interior doors of his life. The first hard piece of evidence was small enough to miss if I had still been the woman who trusted tone more than paper, and it came folded inside his navy coat. It was a receipt from a boutique hotel in Santa Monica, stamped with a room charge and valet time from a night he had told me he was stuck at a late client dinner in West Hollywood. I stood there with that slip between my fingers, reading the black ink twice, and felt something settle into place because facts are quieter than lies but much harder to outrun. A week later, I saw a charge on our joint account to a vendor called Blue Canvas Strategy, low enough to look routine. Then another. Then another. Each one careful and evenly timed. I searched the business and found no real office. No meaningful operating history. No footprint that looked like work. And that was when the shape of it changed for me. This was not only an affair hidden behind nicer shirts and cleaner lies, because Gavin was not just leaving the marriage slowly. He was financing his exit while expecting me to keep the house lights warm. I did not go to the hotel, did not call the number on the receipt, and did not stand outside some restaurant waiting to watch Gavin confirm what the paper had already told me. I made an appointment with Marin Holt instead, a family law attorney in Los Angeles whose office was quiet, expensive, and so orderly it made panic feel childish the moment I sat down. She read the hotel receipt, the account statements, and the vendor charges, then looked up once and said, "Do not confront him yet, because cheating hurts. But financial dissipation is what gives this case real teeth." That was the first time the ground beneath me felt solid again, not because I was less betrayed, but because the betrayal had finally become something measurable and therefore usable. I told her about the condo my aunt left me before we married, the one asset Gavin never touched because even he understood inherited property came with paper trails. Marin nodded, folded her hands, and said, "If you sell that condo and keep every dollar traced and separate, he does not get to turn your inheritance into his landing pad." She brought in Nina Blake, a forensic accountant with a flat voice and the kind of stillness that made numbers sound more dangerous than shouting ever could. Nina followed the transfers from our joint account into Blue Canvas Strategy, then into charges that had nothing to do with hospitality consulting. Just dinners, travel, gifts, and a pattern careful enough to look rehearsed. When she slid the spreadsheet toward me and tapped the line items, she said, "This is not sloppy spending. Julianne, this is an exit plan being subsidized in installments." So I stopped thinking like a wife, trying to confirm an affair, and started moving like a woman building a record, which turned out to be colder and much more effective. I sold the condo quietly, let the proceeds move into a separate account under Marin's documentation, and kept every transfer clean enough to survive daylight. Then I started looking for a place by the water. Around the same time, Caroline Price, one of our museum trustees, mentioned over lunch that Gavin had reached out about introductions for a hospitality concept and had sounded oddly confident about his next chapter. She did not know she had handed me another piece of him, but she had, because confidence without cash always meant Gavin believed he had secured both already. By then I understood what Sabrina was to him. Not a detour, not a weakness, but a partner in a cleaner future he expected to fund with my labor, my order, and the rooms I had opened for him. So I let him keep smiling, let him keep spending, and let him believe I was still the woman arranging the table while he planned to leave it. By the time I invited Gavin away for the weekend, I already knew exactly how he would read my softness, because men like him rarely mistake kindness for strategy until it is too late. I packed his favorite snacks, set one of our old playlists low in the car, and let the drive to Laguna Beach feel easy enough to make his shoulders loosen mile by mile. When he glanced over and smiled, asking, "What brought this on?" I kept my eyes on the highway and answered, "I thought we could use a beautiful weekend before everything gets busy again." He took that line the way he took most things from me, as reassurance first and meaning second, which was how he had stayed comfortable inside my labor for years. By the time the Pacific opened beside us and the cottage appeared above the bluff, white and clean against the late light, he was already breathing like a man arriving. I handed him the brass key without ceremony, watched his fingers close around it, and heard him laugh softly before murmuring, "Julianne, this changes everything." While I replied, "It does." He walked through the rooms touching surfaces as if ownership could be established by confidence, pausing at the kitchen windows, the cedar railing, the bedroom facing the water he always claimed would fix him. I let him absorb every detail I had paid for, the pale linen, the warm wood, the deliberate quiet, because if the night was going to break him, it needed first to flatter him. When he turned back toward me with his eyes bright and said, "You really did this for us. I held his gaze and answered, "For the future." Then let him decide what he thought that meant. At dinner, I poured the wine, passed the halibut across the table, and listened while he praised the house, the view, the timing, speaking with the ease of a man congratulating himself through me. The folder came out only after dessert, slid across the candlelit table in one smooth motion, and his voice lowered into something almost tender when he said, "I didn't want to do this cruelly." Then he looked straight at me and finished it cleanly. "I met someone, and I think we both deserve a dignified ending." I let the silence sit long enough for him to mistake it again. Then I looked at the folder, at his hand beside it, and back at the face he had prepared for my collapse. "I know," I said. And before the shock fully landed, I drew my own folder from my bag and placed it beside his with more care than he deserved. He frowned, opened it, and as his eyes moved over the tracing documents, Nina's summary, the shell vendor records, the preserved charges, and Marin's notice, the color left him in visible stages. "What is this?" he breathed, but he was already reading the answer in the paper, in the dates, in the highlighted transfers, in the deed that carried only my name. I watched his thumb stop over the cottage record and said, "You thought you were leaving me with the old life, Gavin, but you were leaving empty-handed." Then I stood, took my keys, and left him in the house he had wanted for years, sitting inches from the ocean with nothing in front of him but proof that the future he planned to steal had never been his. I drove back to Los Angeles with the windows cracked and the salt still on my skin. And before Gavin could turn panic into persuasion, Marin had already filed the first response. The petition did not need drama because the documents already carried the weight, tracing the cottage to my inheritance proceeds, preserving the shell vendor transfers, and demanding a full accounting. I blocked Gavin's number before the second voicemail finished, not out of anger, but because I was done letting his emergencies recruit me back into the life he had already chosen to leave. By morning, Marin was moving exactly the way she had promised, with clean filings, urgent notices, and enough financial pressure to stop him from pushing anything else beyond reach. Joint accounts were flagged for review. Records were requested. And every dollar tied to Blue Canvas strategy was dragged into daylight, where even Gavin's charm could not make it look legitimate. I sent him only one thing, a scanned copy of the cottage deed with my name alone on the title. And beneath it I wrote, "You said this was your dream." He did not answer me directly, which told me more than a rant would have, because men like Gavin only go quiet when the paper underneath them starts to move. By afternoon, his lawyer reached out with a careful note about access, personal belongings, and a possible conversation regarding equitable use. And Marin answered with 2 hard paragraphs. She made it plain that the property was separately acquired, separately titled, and not available for negotiation. Then attached the tracing record that showed every clean step from my aunt's condo sale to the closing wire. Around the same time, Caroline Price called and asked in that polished donor voice whether there was anything she needed to understand before taking Gavin's name into another room. I told her only what the record could support, that he had represented access he did not have, that money had been diverted, and that his next chapter was built while he was still siphoning from mine. She let the silence breathe, then said, "That is all I needed." And by evening, I knew the introductions he had been counting on were already closing one by one. Sabrina lasted exactly as long as the illusion did, which was never love and never loyalty. Only runway. And once the runway disappeared, she stepped off without hesitation. A voicemail from an unfamiliar number arrived late that night. Her voice clipped and angry as she made it clear Gavin had sold her, a man who was neither funded nor free. I deleted it, slept alone in the cottage for the first time, without waiting for a screen to light in the dark, and let the house settle around me while the ocean kept its own steady time. The courtroom did not give Gavin the kind of stage he preferred, because nothing in that room responded to charm. pacing, or the polished tone he used when he needed strangers to trust him quickly. Marin sat beside me with the file arranged in clean sections. And across the aisle, Gavin looked smaller than he had in the cottage. Smaller even than he had sounded in his voicemails. By then, the case was no longer a marriage argument pretending to be private pain. Because the receipts, transfers, tracing records, and vendor trail had turned it into something paper could finish. His attorney tried first to soften the shape of what he had done, calling the blue canvas charges ordinary business movement and the cottage a marital expectation shaped by years of shared planning. Marin answered without heat, walking the court through my aunt's condo, the separate sale proceeds, the isolated account, and the closing wire that placed the Laguna property entirely beyond him. When the judge asked whether there was any evidence, Gavin contributed separate funds or acquired title interest. His lawyer shuffled pages, looked down, and said nothing that could survive the record. That silence landed harder than any accusation could have, because after months of performance, the truth of him fit into a gap where proof should have been. Gavin turned toward me once and tried a softer angle. His voice lowered just enough to sound personal as he said, "Julianne, this was a mistake, and we were married too long for this." I looked at the exhibits stacked between us, at the shell vendor entries, the hotel charges, the tracing summary, and answered, "No, Gavin, this was a plan, and now it has a file." The ruling came without theater, which made it feel even cleaner, confirming the cottage as my separate property and treating the diverted funds as exactly what they were. Gavin's claim to the house was denied. The accounting issues remained in play against him, and the settlement structure bent where his own records had weakened it. Afterward, outside the courtroom, he stood still for a second, as if he expected one more private door to open. But I walked past him without slowing because by then every page had already said everything left worth hearing. Back at the cottage, healing did not arrive as a speech or a revelation, but as a series of absences I could finally trust. No phone lit the room at midnight. No mood shifted the air before dinner. And no part of my day bent itself around a man pretending entitlement was partnership. The peace felt real because it had weight. In the unlocked quiet of the kitchen, the clean edge of the bed, and the calendar that now belonged entirely to me. I kept living there full time, letting the rooms become mine in ways Gavin never would have noticed. With books stacked where I wanted them, and mornings left undecorated by performance. At the museum, the story traveled the way truth usually does in grown adult circles. Not loudly, but clearly enough that people adjusted their distance from him without needing instructions. Carolyn never raised her voice or made a scene. Yet Gavin's name stopped opening doors. And in Los Angeles, that kind of silence is often the final verdict. What surprised me was not that I survived him, but that, once the noise ended, I could hear myself again with embarrassing clarity. I started speaking to small groups of women about financial records, boundaries, and the danger of confusing stability with safety. And every room filled, because none of us had been warned properly. When I stepped onto the porch each morning and heard the Pacific moving below the bluff, I understood that Gavin had not lost me in court. He had lost access to the life I had been carrying for both of us. That was the part he never understood. That I was never the background to his ambition. I was the structure that made his ambition look livable. He wanted the house, the access, the order, the polished future. And in the end, he walked away with none of it, because none of it had ever been created by him. I gave him the key to his dream and watched him mistake an open door for ownership. Then I closed it behind him and kept the life he never truly saw. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it gave you something honest, or reminded you that peace can still be rebuilt, stay close. I hope whatever comes next in your life feels steady, kind, and fully yours. And if love finds you again, I hope it arrives gently.